Welcome back to Book Break, and no, you have not travelled back in time. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jean and I used to be quite the regular host over on this channel, and I'm back today to guest host this episode of Book Break, which is all about classic science fiction novels. Now, I tried to look for a definitive definition of science fiction for you in this video, but nobody agrees, let me tell you that. The definition of science fiction has been ever-changing since the genre first appeared on our bookcases. For me, the science fiction genre is when authors use their literature to explore alternative realities, potentially in the past, the present, or the future, and there has been some sort of attempt at scientifically explaining the differences in this society, even if it's something as small as affecting one person's life or affecting the entire world. And this can vary from space travel to aliens, to time travel, to alternative histories, apocalyptic futures and terrifying inventions. But with so many things potentially coming under this umbrella that is science fiction, I've decided to pick for you today 5 books that I feel are classics in the science fiction genres that epitomise some of the elements you might expect to find in science fiction, and are all fantastically entertaining reads that demonstrate the diversity of science fiction out there. Naturally, because of the difficulty in defining science fiction, it's difficult to pick which books fall under this category from the very beginning. Many literary critics see the science fiction genre as something that began truly in the 19th century. Although as a classicist by trade, I cannot help but think back to Lucian's A True History, which is a piece of ancient Greek literature with the original title Aletheia Diagamata. This piece of literature was first written in the 2nd century AD during the Roman Empire by Lucian, a Greek-speaking author of Assyrian descent. It was intended as satire of the outlandish stories that we find in a lot of Greek and Roman historical sources, and in doing so he takes his characters all the way to the moon where they meet alien races, and if that isn't science fiction, I don't know what is. But since the critics tell me I must wait for the invention of the novel before science fiction truly takes its place in our literary canon, my first recommendation is actually what is often considered the first science fiction novel, and that is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. So this book was first published in 1818 and was the product of a writing competition between 3 friends: Mary Shelley, her husband Percy Shelley, and their good friend Lord Byron. If you're not familiar, the book itself tells the story of a young university student and budding scientist, Victor Frankenstein. And during his time at university, Frankenstein becomes obsessed with bringing life to a being of his own creation, and thus we have Frankenstein's monster. The methods he uses to create this creature, inspired by scientific questions of the time period in which Mary Shelley was writing. The book itself is a moral quandary. It explores our obligations to those around us, our treatment of those that are different, and the origin of evil. It's a classic for a reason and a must-read for anyone interested in the science fiction genre. If I continue chronologically, however, my next recommendation for you is The Day of the Triffids by John Wyndham, a classic writer in the science fiction genre if there ever was one. His writing is distinct and each of his novels unique, but it really is, for me, The Day of the Triffids that stands out above the rest. The book itself came out in 1951 and follows our protagonist Bill during the apocalypse in Britain, as far as we know, as we never get really to see the outside world beyond Britain itself. Bill himself lives in an England much like it would have been in the 1950s, except for one major difference: Triffids. Triffids are a plant that started to grow on the planet a few years ago. Nobody knows what they came from or exactly what they're capable of, but they have been breeding them because of their usefulness. However, when the apocalypse begins, it's the Triffids that gain the upper hand. Bill wakes up in a hospital after an injury on a Triffid farm and finds out he's one of the very, very few people still alive who has the power of sight. Everybody else who witnessed a meteor shower during the night has gone blind. And in a world not designed for a predominantly blind population, havoc takes hold and things start to fall apart, with the ever-lurking presence of the Triffids in the background. But beyond scientific experiments and post-apocalyptic futures, another classic element of science fiction is, of course, time travel, and one of my favourite time travel classics is Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. This book is the perfect combination of the literary, the historical and the science fiction all in one. First published in 1979, this book follows Dana, a black woman living in the United States of America, who all of a sudden time travels back to 1815 when the slavery era is at its height. As a black woman who has faced her own struggles with racism in her contemporary time, she is suddenly assumed by everyone around her to be a slave and living history firsthand. Now, the reason that she has time travelled back appears to be that she is being tasked with saving the life of a young white boy. Now, each time she saves the life of this young white boy, she travels back to her own time, and then a few days later might find herself going back to 1815 once more, when our young white man Rufus is a little bit older and he is once again in mortal peril. Octavia E. Butler perfectly uses the science fiction genre to explore slavery and racism in 1800s America from her contemporary point of view. This book does not shy away from the horrors and racism and violence of that time, and is a perfect example of the way in which science fiction can be used to explore broader issues. But as I will assure you, science fiction is perfectly capable of being light-hearted as well, and in fact the book that perfectly demonstrates that is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams, a trilogy in 5 parts. I think that subheading itself gives you a hint at what you're in for when it comes to this piece of classic comedic science fiction. First written and broadcast as a radio production in 1978 and later published as a novel in 1979, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy follows Arthur Dent, a human man whose best friend, it turns out, is actually an alien from another planet. This friend, aka Ford Prefect, has been stranded on Earth whilst waiting to hitchhike a ride on a passing spaceship, and his first opportunity to do this is when the Vogon constructor fleet comes to demolish Earth in order to build a hyperspace bypass. But thanks to the close relationship he has built with Arthur Dent, he takes his new friend with him whilst the Earth is destroyed. This book is a pop culture classic. It has been adapted for television and film. Many of you are probably already familiar with the number 42, which is in fact the answer to the big question of the life, the universe and everything, and has since escaped the confines of this book alone, and an entire subculture has developed around it. But if you like the sound of grumpy robots, space hitchhikers, and aliens who write and perform terrible poetry, then this is the book and series for you. But for my next recommendation, I've decided to go for something you might call a modern classic, something that was published a lot more recently, but is by an author who's already had a massive impact on the speculative fiction genre, and that is The City and the City by China Miéville. This is a surreal, speculative, alternative world in which we follow a police officer on the hunt for a murderer. This novel first came out in 2009, is available in this gorgeous Picador Classics edition, and in it China Miéville wanted to combine his typical weird speculative science fiction work with the classic police procedural. The twin city-states from the title that this book is set in are Alcoma and Basel. In some ways they mirror our own world, but in many other ways they are far progressed in scientific innovation. But the border between these two cities goes so far as to prevent citizens from either even noticing each other whilst they walk down streets in the same geographical area. It's weird and mind-bending, but full of so much intrigue and commentary on the contemporary world, which is something that ultimately defines China Miéville's writing. But those are my 5 classic science fiction recommendations. No doubt you're all wondering where Arthur C. Clarke and Philip K. Dick are on these lists, but it was impossible for me to cover every single possibility of science fiction out there because, as you know, you can do almost anything with it. So please do leave your recommendations down in the comments down below. I'm always looking for more fantastic science fiction reads to pick up, and I'm sure everyone else will appreciate your recommendations as well. And aside from here, I'm always available over on my own channel, Bookish Thoughts. But thanks so much to Book Break for having me back. It's been a blast, and as I always like to say, happy reading. Bye guys!